There was a terrible thump on the doorstep that echoed throughout the house. Alan Holloway, who had just returned home, jumped at the unexpected sound and tossed his coat carelessly onto the nearest chair. Recently divorced after discovering his wife's infidelity, Alan now lived alone, completely absorbed in his work as an advertising agent. Not expecting visitors, a sharp knock on the door prompted his questions. "Hello?" Alan opened the door with some irritation. A short man with short black disheveled hair stood before him. His eyes were dull and almost devoid of life. Alan looked at him, confused at first, but then gradually began to recognize him as an old classmate. "Lonnie?" He smirked, remembering the skinny kid he'd scoffed at. "Little Lonnie McCollin. How the hell are you doing? It's been so many years." "I forgive you," Lonnie said in a quiet, monotone voice, holding out a small wooden box to him as a sign of forgiveness. His lips slowly folded into a hellish smirk, turning into a distorted smile. He stood motionless, spreading his arms like some grotesque monument presenting an unusual gift. "What's wrong with you?" Alan reluctantly held out his hand, accepting the offer. "Is there anything I can help you with?" He watched as Lonnie simply turned and walked away into the distant, dark night, standing motionless. Confused and frightened by it all, Alan shouted to Lonnie, demanding some sort of explanation, but Lonnie just disappeared like a ghost in the night. Alan had always felt guilty about bullying Lonnie as a child. He wrote off his behavior as playful bullying and teenage aggression. The mysterious encounter left Alan with a sense of unease, and he locked the door, glancing at the box. The small wooden box was decorated with strange hieroglyphics and inscriptions. It was no bigger than a shoebox and surprisingly light. The lid of the box was carefully closed with a single metal lock, but Alan noticed that the lock had no keyhole. He shook the box, but no sound was heard inside. Finding this extremely odd, Alan ignored the strangeness and dropped the box without hesitation. Alan headed toward the kitchen, deciding to pour himself a drink to relax. His footsteps faltered, however, when he saw the same wooden box standing on the kitchen table. Alan quickly glanced over to where he had just dropped it and saw that the box was no longer there. A feeling of unease gripped him as he slowly approached the mysterious box. Suddenly, he heard a scraping sound, coming from inside the box. It sounded like fingernails scraping threateningly on wood. The closer he got, the louder and more desperate the sound became. The feeling of unease turned to panic. Alan decided to arm himself in case some creature tried to get out of the box. He imagined it might be some kind of mouse or stray animal, a harmless prank in response to his bullying last year. He walked over and resolutely picked up the poker from the fireplace, ready to put an end to this annoying prank. Turning around, he headed back to the kitchen, annoyed with the whole situation. Again he stopped, dumbfounded, when he saw the box. This time, the metal lock that closed the box had somehow succumbed to the will of whatever lurked inside. The wooden box stood on a stand, with the lid open, and what was inside got free. The grinding became more intense, drowning out all other sounds. The air around Alan became cold, and he stood motionless, nerves tense as the strings of a bowstring. Alan held his breath as the smell of sulfur filled the room and watched in horror as a hand emerged from the depths of the crate. Slowly, a creature-like figure emerged. The crunch of deforming limbs made Alan jerk, and it slowly crawled outward. A nightmarish creature with a thin body and thick charcoal skin towered ominously over Alan. Tangled in fear, Alan felt his heart leap out of his chest. All he wanted to do was turn away and run as fast as he could, but primal fear offered him no mercy. The creature's eyes flashed with an orange-yellow light, reptilian pupils burning with a glare. Barbed needles rested on its shoulders, barely covered by long black tangled hair. It slowly raised a thin hand and pointed it at Alan. With a sinister growl, the creature bared its teeth, revealing an unusually large and crooked smile on its face. Sharp, triangular, intertwining rows of white, deadly teeth were what met Alan's eyes. Words stuck in Alan's throat as he looked directly at the monster standing before him. Gathering all his courage, he broke free of the suffocating terror. In a rage, he rushed across the hallway toward his bedroom. Alan felt his heart pounding in his chest and the drums beating in his ears. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. It was too much to perceive. Instinct and self-preservation were now obeying Alan's will. The bedroom doors slammed shut with a clatter as Alan rushed inside in desperation, wanting to take cover. The windows were tightly shut, and deep down he knew he didn't have much time left. Outside, there was a creaking sound underfoot. The creature was getting closer. Alan dashed to the nearest closet, hoping for one last attempt to take cover or find refuge from the creature behind the door. Alan gripped the poker from the fireplace tightly in his hands, nailing it into his flesh, causing his skin to puncture. The creature was already at the door. Alan could hear scraping and scratching as it made its way into the room. His body trembled with anticipation of his inevitable encounter with the horrible monster. The light from the bedroom barely filtered through the thin shutters on the closet door, barely illuminating the dark room. Outside the door, Alan could just make out the shadow of the creature coming closer and closer. He clutched the poker and raised it, preparing for one last resistance. The creature's shadow moved slowly back and forth at the closet door. A wave of terror came over him, a fear so strong that it swallowed him whole. Suddenly, Alan's heart stopped as he felt the warmth of the creature's breath against his neck. It was now inside the closet. Though he couldn't see it, every sense of him sensed its presence. The creature let out a low, ominous growl, coming closer with each terrifying breath. Drops of sweat dripped down Alan's forehead, and a premonition of the inevitable encompassed him. He shuddered, raised his hands, and began waving them like a madman, thrashing in the darkness. It was over in a matter of seconds. A terrifying scream pierced the air with deafening force, determining Alan's fate. Suddenly there was a knock on the door like a thunderous boom. Alan's ex-wife, Grace, hadn't heard from him in weeks. The divorce had ended in tears, and the divorce was absurd. Still, Alan wasn't someone who just disappeared without saying a word to anyone. She walked to the door, and another anxious knock, louder than the previous one, filled her with intense anxiety. "Hello?" Grace opened the door and was astonished to see Alan in front of her. "Alan, where have you been? Everyone's been looking for you," she exclaimed. She looked at him standing in the doorway with a listless and blank stare. His hair was disheveled, and his face looked haggard, as if a huge albatross was hanging from his neck, dragging him down. His hands clutched tightly to a small wooden box, which he slowly raised in front of her as a sign of peace. Grace, visibly shaken, accepted the small box and bombarded Alan with a hail of questions. He stood motionless, almost like a statue, and with a monstrous smile simply said, "I forgive you."